heartbreaking. The exhausted mother dog lay motionless, her puppies crying in vain. Hello everyone, don't forget to subscribe to our channel to hear more meaningful stories. The night draped over Los Angeles like a heavy, suffocating shroud. Cold winds howled through the narrow alleyways, carrying the stench of rotting garbage and the silent echoes of forgotten souls. The dim glow of flickering streetlights cast fractured reflections in the puddles of rain and filth among the Esche shadows. A motionless figure lay sprawled on the damp concrete, a pitiful skeletal frame covered in scars and exhaustion. Her name was Bella. Around her, 5 tiny bodies trembled and whimpered, their desperate cries piercing the night like a sorrowful melody. They were newborns, blind, helpless and starving, dragging themselves over their mother's frail body, nuzzling against her cold skin, in search of warmth, in search of life, but there was nothing left to give. Bella's milk had dried up days ago, her body ravaged by hunger and fatigue. Her breaths came in slow, uneven rasps, each one weaker than the last. Rain began to fall cold and merciless, turning the dust beneath them into a bitter, muddy slush. Bella barely felt it. Her mind drifted teetering on the fragile line between consciousness and oblivion. In the darkness of her fading awareness, memories clawed their way to the surface, ghosts of a past that refused to let go. She saw him, the man she had once loved, unconditionally. Jack, the one who had raised her, not with kindness but with cruelty. She had been his tool, his weapon, his fighter, in the underground world of dogfighting. He had molded her into something fierce, something ruthless, and when she was no longer useful, when her body bore more wounds than victories, he had discarded her like trash. She could still hear the screech of tires, feel the brutal act of her body hitting the pavement as he threw her from a moving car. She had barely had time to register the pain before the sound of tiny cries filled the air, her puppies born into a world that had no mercy for creatures like them. She had tried to chase after him, her broken body dragging itself forward, but her legs had failed her. The red tail lights had disappeared into the night, leaving nothing behind but silence and a mother too weak to protect her own now. As thunder rumbled overhead, Bella's body shuddered involuntarily. The smallest pup, a fragile snow-white male with a black patch over his eye, let out a weak, pitiful whimper. It was barely more than a whisper against the howling wind, but it carried the weight of a plea. A desperate cry for help. People passed by, their coats pulled tight against the cold, their eyes flicking briefly toward the scene, before darting away. A woman in a thick jacket hesitated for a moment, something tightening in her chest, but she shook it off and quickened her pace. An old man pushing a cart filled with recyclable paws muttered something under his breath. "You can't save the whole world," and kept walking. Bella's breathing hitched every passing second, unraveled another thread tethering her to this world. The rain fell harder, the wind howled louder, and the universe seemed to whisper that this was the end. But then something shifted across the street. A figure emerged from the shadows, a woman weary from a long shift at the clinic, her scrubs damp from the misty air. Emily had no idea that her life was about to change, but when she saw them, the motionless mother, the squirming, helpless newborns, her heart clenched, and in that instant hesitation ceased to exist. Without thinking, without caring about the honking cars or the rain-soaked pavement, Emily ran toward them. Emily's breath hitched as she sprinted across the slick pavement, her tired feet pounding against the asphalt. The sharp blare of car horns erupted around her, but she didn't care. Her focus was locked on the fragile scene before her, the lifeless form of the mother dog, the 5 tiny creatures clinging to her, the way the rain drenched their frail bodies like an unrelenting curse. She dropped to her knees in the freezing mud, ignoring the way it soaked through her scrubs. Her trembling hands reached out, brushing over the mother's motionless frame the moment her fingers met the dog's thin, ice-cold fur. A sickening fear twisted in her chest. Was she too late? "Please no, Emily," whispered, barely aware she had spoken aloud. Desperation surged through her as she pressed her fingers against the dog's ribs, searching for any sign of life, and then their faint, so weak it was almost non-existent, but it was there, a heartbeat, a fragile, flickering pulse. Her gaze darted to the puppies, their tiny bodies wriggling against their unresponsive mother, blindly seeking warmth that she no longer had to give. The smallest one, the one with the black patch over his eye, was trembling so violently that his tiny cries barely escaped his lips. He was fading. Emily swallowed hard, her mind racing. There was no time to think, no time to hesitate. If she stayed here, they would die. She yanked off her jacket and wrapped it around the puppies, tucking them close to her chest. The tiny bodies quivered against her, their warmth barely detectable. Then, with a deep breath, she slipped her arms under the mother dog's frail form and lifted. The weight in her arms was startling. Not because Bella was heavy, but because she wasn't. She was far too light. Her body robbed of every ounce of strength by starvation and neglect. Emily tightened her grip and pushed herself to her feet, her heart hammering. Rain pounded against her skin, the wind howled through the streets, but she didn't stop. She ran every step, sent jolts of pain through her exhausted muscles, but she refused to slow down. The mother dog's head lulled against her shoulder, her breath so shallow that Emily wasn't sure if she would make it to the clinic. Just a little longer, she pleaded, her voice barely audible over the storm. "Hold on. Okay? Just a little longer." The city blurred around her, the wet pavement, the towering buildings, the distant glow of streetlights. But in that moment, none of it mattered. All that mattered was getting them to safety. Emily burst through the clinic doors, her breath ragged, her arms shaking. From exhaustion, the warmth of the room hit her like a wave, but she had no time to feel relief. "Sarah," she gasped, her voice hoarse, as she stumbled toward the exam table. Her assistant looked up, eyes widening at the sight of Emily, drenched mud streak and cradling a nearly lifeless pit bull in her arms. Without hesitation, Sarah sprang into action, clearing the table. As Emily gently laid the dog down, the pit bull's body was limp, her ribs protruding sharply beneath her thin coat. Her breath came in uneven, shallow gasps, barely more than whispers against the sterile air. "She's in bad shape," Emily said, her voice tied with urgency. Sarah was already moving, grabbing IV fluids and supplies. "We need to get a line in her now." Emily pressed her fingers against the dog's neck, searching for a pulse. It was faint, so faint that fear coiled in her stomach like a vice. The puppies, still swaddled in her jacket, whimpered softly from where she had placed them on a warm towel. She glanced over and saw the smallest one, his tiny body barely moving, his breaths coming in, weak little shutters. Not on my watch. With practiced hands, Emily inserted the IV catheter, her fingers trembling only slightly as she secured it. "Hold on, girl, stay with me," she murmured, watching as the fluid slowly trickled into the dog's vein. Bella barely reacted. Sarah's gaze flicked toward the puppies. "They need food now," Emily nodded, grabbing a syringe filled with warm milk. She scooped up the tiniest one. First, the little white pup with the black patch over his eye. He was so light, it was as if she held nothing at all. Carefully, she touched the tip of the syringe to his mouth. "Come on, sweetheart," she whispered. "Drink." For a terrifying moment, nothing happened. The pup's tiny body remained still, his mouth barely parting. Then at last he latched on. The first few drops of milk disappeared into his mouth, and Emily felt a flicker of hope ignite inside her chest. "That's it," she whispered. "Fight, little guy," across the table. Sarah sucked in a breath. Emily, her breathing stabilizing, Emily's head snapped up. Bella was still frighteningly weak, But her breaths, though slow, were steadier now, a tiny shift, but enough for the first time since she had found them in that dark, rain-soaked. Emily allowed herself to believe that maybe this mother and her babies had a fighting chance. The clinic was silent, except for the rhythmic beeping of machines and the soft patter of rain against the windows. Emily sat beside the exam table, her fingers absent-mindedly stroking the pit bull's forehead. Bella had survived the night, but barely. The IV fluids had steadied her vitals, yet she remained weak, her body too exhausted to do anything but exist. Her puppies, curled up in a small blanket-lined box, whimpered softly in their sleep, tiny bodies rising and falling with each breath. Sarah approached, holding a warm towel. "She's still scared?" she murmured, watching as Bella flinched slightly at her movement. Emily nodded, her heart twisting. "She's been through hell." Bella's dark, tired eyes flickered open for a brief moment, glancing toward the sound of her babies. Instinct, even in the face of overwhelming weakness, never died. Emily leaned in her voice, soft, gentle. "They're safe," she whispered. "You saved them." The pit bull didn't move, but something in her gaze shifted. Emily knew that healing wouldn't just be physical. It would be a battle of trust, of proving to Bella that not all humans were like the one who had thrown her away days past. The clinic became a quiet sanctuary, a place of slow recovery. Bella's ribs were still visible, her legs still wobbled when she tried to stand, but there was progress, small, fragile, but real. And then came the moment Emily had been waiting for. She held out a small piece of food in her palm, her breath caught in anticipation. Bella stared at it, not with hunger, not yet, but with hesitation, as if expecting the offer to come with pain. Emily didn't move, didn't speak. She just waited. And then finally, Bella leaned forward, her cold, dry nose brushing against Emily's fingers. Before she took the tiniest bite, Sarah let out a shaky breath beside her. "Oh my God!" A small smile pulled at Emily's lips, but she didn't speak, afraid to break the delicate moment. Bella swallowed, then slowly, almost cautiously, licked the last traces of food from Emily's hand, and just like that, something shifted for the first time since being abandoned. Bella wasn't just surviving, she was beginning to trust. The night was heavy, pressing down on the city like an inspections of sleeping dogs. Bella lay curled on a thick blanket, her puppies nestled against her belly, their tiny bodies rising and falling in peaceful synchrony for the first time in what felt like forever. She was safe, but safety is a fragile thing. Emily sat at the reception desk, absently scrolling through her phone, when a notification lit up the screen. A new comment on the post about Bella and her puppies. She tapped it open, expecting another kind message, another person touched by their story. Instead, the words sent a cold shiver down her spine. "That's my dog, I want her back, I know where your clinic is." Her pulse slammed against her ribs. No, it couldn't be with trembling hands. She tapped the profile. The picture loaded slowly, as if the universe itself was hesitant to confirm her worst fear. And then she saw him, Jack, the man who had once owned Bella. The man who had trained her for violence, thrown her away like garbage, left her to die in the rain. Emily's breath came in shallow, uneven gasps. Her mind raced, weighing possibilities, but deep down she already knew he was coming. And then, as if summoned by her thoughts, a sound shattered the silence, a soft, deliberate click from the back door. Every hair on Emily's arm stood on end, slowly, carefully. She turned her head. The clinic was dark, except for the dim glow from the reception computer. Sarah was in the back room tending to supplies. Bella and the puppies were asleep, but someone was outside her stomach. Twisted into knots, she pushed back from her chair as another noise followed, a quiet, testing push against the door. "He's here!" Heart hammering. She rushed down the hall, stopping just outside the exam room. Bella's ears twitched in her sleep. Sensing something even in her exhaustion, Emily bent down beside her, her voice barely above a whisper. "Bella," she murmured. "I need you to trust me. We have to go." The pit bull's tired eyes blinked open, confusion flickering across her face. Emily reached out, pressing a gentle hand against her side, trying to calm the tension coiling in the dog's body. A sharp knock rang out the clinic door, rattled Emily's breath, caught not much time. She scooped up the puppies, wrapping them in a soft blanket. Sarah appeared in the doorway, eyes wide, already understanding. "Take them," Emily whispered, pressing the fragile bundle into her arms. "Go to the back room. Stay quiet. If something happens, get out." Sarah hesitated only a second before nodding and disappearing down the hall. The knock turned into pounding, a voice low, menacing, filtered through the door. "I know you're in there. Open up." Emily's hands balled into fists. Her heart was a wild drumbeat in her chest. She would not let him take Bella, not now. Not ever. The pounding on the door grew louder, each heavy thud sending tremors through the clinic walls, and Emily stood, frozen, her breath, shallow pulse, roaring in her ears. The dim light from the reception desk cast long shadows stretching toward the door, like silent warnings. Bella was tense beside her, her ribs rising and falling in uneven rhythm, her ears pinned back, as if sensing the familiar presence of a nightmare. She thought she had escaped. Then the voice came low, cold, dripping with entitlement. "I know you're in there. Open the damn door." "That's my Emily's." Fingers curled into fists, nails biting into her palms. Not this time. Another bang harder. The frame rattled. Sarah's footsteps were barely audible as she crept back into the hallway, clutching the puppies tightly to her chest. Her eyes met Emily's, wide with fear, but steady with resolve. "I can sneak out the back," she whispered. "Take the puppies somewhere safe." Emily nodded sharply. "Do it." Sarah hesitated only a second before vanishing into the darkness. The faintest sound of a door clicking shut told Emily that at least the puppies were out of harm's way. Another slam against the door. Jack's voice turned to a growl. "I'll break this thing down if I have to." Emily squared, her shoulders inhaling deeply. Fear pulsed through her veins, but she pushed it aside. She wasn't just standing between this man and Bella. She was standing between him and every fight, every wound, every moment of suffering he had forced on her. She reached for the clinic phone, about to dial 911, when a different sound cut through the night. Siren Wool's red and blue lights flashed against the frosted glass. Tires screeched to a stop outside, heavy boots hit the pavement, and then a sharp, commanding voice. "Step away from the door hands where we can see them." Silence for a long, heart-stopping moment. Emily thought he might run, that he might force his way in, might do something reckless. But then the unmistakable click of handcuffs, the rustle of a struggle, the gruff bark of an officer. Emily's knees nearly buckled with relief. She exhaled shakily, pressing a hand to her chest as she dared to peer through the glass. Outside, Jack was pinned against the hood of a police car, his face twisted in rage. An officer was speaking to him, but Emily didn't need to hear the words to know the truth. They had him. The nightmare was over. Emily turned back to Bella, who had not moved from her spot on the blanket. The pit bull's eyes flickered between the door and Emily. Uncertainty. Wearing in her gaze, Emily knelt beside her, running gentle fingers over the dog's scarred head. "You're safe now," she whispered. Bella blinked once. Then slowly, finally, she let out a breath, long and deep, and laid her head down against Emily's lap. For the first time in her life, she was free. The morning sun spilled golden light across the clinic, casting soft, warm hues through the windows. The world outside was beginning to stir. Cars passing, birds calling, life moving forward. But inside, in the quiet sanctuary of the recovery room, time felt suspended in a fragile, peaceful moment. Bella lay curled in a nest of soft blankets, her puppies nestled safely against her belly for the first time since Emily had found her in that dark, rain-soaked alley. She wasn't trembling, she wasn't flinching at every sound. She was simply there, breathing, resting, healing. Emily sat beside her, exhaustion heavy in her bones, but relief even heavier in her heart. It was over. Jack was gone. Bella was safe. The weight of the past had finally loosened its grip. A gentle knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. Sarah peeked inside, a steaming cup of coffee in her hand. "Thought you might need this," she murmured with a small smile. Emily exhaled a quiet laugh, accepting the cup with grateful hands. "You have no idea." But before she could take a sip, a soft noise broke the stillness, a tiny whimper, followed by a faint rustling. Bella stirred Emily's breath, caught the pitbull, blinked drowsily, her dark eyes glassy with exhaustion, but no longer clouded with fear. She stretched her legs slightly, then slowly, deliberately, lifted her head. Emily didn't move, didn't speak, just watched. And then Bella did something that made Emily's chest tighten. She turned her head and licked the smallest pup. Lucky, gently, carefully, like a mother reassuring her child. Sarah let out a shaky breath beside her. "Oh my God!" Emily swallowed the lump in her throat, her fingers curling tightly around the warm cup in her hands. It was such a small moment, just a flicker of motion, a mother caring for her baby, but it meant everything. It meant Bella wasn't just surviving anymore, she was living days past. And the clinic became more than just a place of healing. It became a home. The puppies grew stronger, their once feeble cries turning into playful yips. Bella gained weight, her ribs no longer jutting out, her once dull coat beginning to shine. She was still cautious, still watchful, but there was something different in her eyes now, hope. And then just when Emma thought her heart couldn't take any more miracles, the final one arrived. David walked into the clinic on a quiet afternoon, his steps slow but steady, a man who had seen his own share of battles, his own wounds, some visible, some not. He knelt beside Bella without speaking, just waiting, watching, and Bella, after a long pause, did something she had never done with a stranger before. She pressed her nose against his palm. Emily didn't need to say anything. She knew in that moment that Bella had found where she belonged. A week later, Bella and Lucky left the clinic, stepping into a new world, a world where the past no longer had a hold on them, where pain and fear were nothing more than fading. Shadows. Emily watched from the doorway as David guided them toward his truck, the afternoon sun wrapping them in golden warmth. Bella glanced back one last time, her dark eyes meeting Emily's, and in that silent exchange there was no need for words. "Thank you." Emily smiled, her heart full. "You did it, girl." And with that, Bella turned, trotting toward her new life, with Lucky bouncing happily beside her. She wasn't just a survivor anymore, she was home. Bella's journey is more than just a story of survival. It's a testament to resilience, kindness, and the power of second chances. She was abandoned, broken, and left to die. But with love, patience, and compassion, she found a new life filled with warmth and security. Her story reminds us that every life, no matter how small or forgotten, deserves a chance. There are countless Bellas out there, innocent souls, waiting for someone to care, to save them from a cruel fate. This story is a call to action, to be the person who stops, who helps, who makes a difference. Join us in spreading compassion. If Bella's story touched your heart, help us share more meaningful and inspiring stories like hers. Subscribe to our channel, like this video, and share it with others, because together we can give more animals the happy endings they deserve. Hit the subscribe button now and be a part of something bigger. Let's change lives, one story at a time. E for